Warning, this review contains content that may not be suitable for children. Viewer discretion is advised.
Whew! Hey there guys, I just got back from the hospital where the doctors were able to successfully move my heart from my throat back down into my chest and unstick my eyelids from the tops of their sockets so I can blink again. If I want to. So now I'm ready to review Resident Evil 7. This has been near the top of my watch list since E3, so let's crack this baby open and give it a look-see.
Welcome to the family, son.
It doesn't take a hardcore Resident Evil fan to see that 7 marks a huge shift for the series. Not only does it take Resident Evil back to its roots after 6 sent it careening off a cliff with a blockbuster action movie explosion, but it adopts a first-person perspective instead of the third-person, over-the-shoulder point of view the series has used since 4. In it, we play as a civilian named Ethan, who is led to a farm in rural Louisiana after receiving an email from his long-missing and presumed dead wife Mia. Things naturally don't go super well, however, as the plantation belongs to the Bakers, a family of Southerners with inhuman abilities and nefarious intentions. You become stuck on the property, and it's up to you to figure out what's going on and find a way out. First off, let's talk about the presentation. This game looks stinking good. One of the things I always admired about Resident Evil 4 was the beautiful texture work, and 7 blew me away all over again. The dark, dank, garbage-strewn environments are rendered in extraordinary detail. Not only does this give the house a great sense of lived-in realism, but constantly offers disturbing glimpses into the minds and actions of the house's insane residents. The lighting is also wonderful, and the complete package makes for some seriously heavy atmosphere. I wasn't fortunate enough to be able to play in VR, but the higher resolution offered by the PS4 Pro, plus pulling the couch closer to the TV, felt like the next best thing. These environments have a way of pulling you in and keeping you there, and that realism heightens the tension drastically. The character models of both the monsters and the human characters are fantastic and very well animated, even if the mouth movements sometimes awkwardly fall out of sync with the voices. And speaking of voices and awkwardness, I'm happy to report that the series' signature style of voice acting is here as always. Just bad enough to be endearing, but not so bad that it's annoying or abrasive. Here you've got a cast of Southern characters, and exactly 0 of them can pull off a convincing accent, often slipping between Southern, African-American vernacular, and Eric Cartman.
Shut up and listen if you want to stay alive.
I love it. Sound design on the whole is phenomenal, actually. Much of the game will be spent in relative quiet, though the sounds of your movement also work to heighten immersion, especially if you're using headphones, and far-off bumps and knocks leave you constantly wondering if something's coming after you. Whenever I came upon danger and that score did kick in, it never failed to make the encounter 5 times scarier. I've heard a lot of dissonant, skittery horror movie violins in my day, but this is top-notch stuff. It snakes into your spine and electrifies your nerves. Even if I couldn't see any enemies in front of me, the rising music would strike me with terror, like the worst thing in the world was about to happen. On the gameplay side, this truly is a return to survival horror. Instead of running around and blasting guys left and right, it's all about creeping around, avoiding or carefully dealing with danger, and hunting for that next item you need to move forward. Resources are extremely limited, so a large amount of your time will be spent snooping around every table and shelf and crevice and corner looking for ammo and healing items. This is an interesting formula that is easy to get wrong, and in fact, I believed at first that the balance was off. I spent the first few hours of the game being frustrated more than anything. I always love hunting for items, but at the start you've got very little to defend yourself with, and you're being stalked by a seemingly invincible enemy. On top of that, there are these goop guys called the Molded, and they take so much to bring down that I often found myself running past them and getting killed anyway. I kept getting into encounters and not knowing what to do, and it was a pretty aggravating process of trial and error. I was at the point where every time I found an item or did anything, I wanted to run back to a save room so I wouldn't lose any progress, and that made the whole thing a great big slog. The interesting thing about Resident Evil 7, though, is just how much my opinion on the game changed from the start to the finish. This early stuff was bumming me out something awful, but as I progressed, I began to learn what I could expect from the game and what it expected from me. The more I understood how it all worked, the more I started to enjoy it. And once I really got my hooks into it, or vice versa, it got good. Really good. That formula and balance I was talking about? Turns out they achieved the crud out of it. Resident Evil 7 offers one of the most perfect levels of challenge I've experienced in such a game. It absolutely requires that your every action is careful and methodical, and that you treat every single bullet like it's made of solid gold. The oppressive environment and the limited help and the slow, ponderous pacing meld together into an experience that is constantly satisfying, and hugely so. Every single enemy you take down feels like an achievement, like you've gotten yourself just a little closer to surviving this whole ordeal. When you finally find that key you've been looking for, your soul just fills with bunnies and butterflies. Hunting around for items is time-consuming, but you're always rewarded, and whenever you come across a particularly juicy stash of supplies, or better yet, a more powerful weapon, the elation you feel is immeasurable. Every victory and every bit of progression is oh so sweet, like you really earned it. Of course though, the game is only that satisfying because of the difficulty and the ammo scarcity, and therein lies the flip side. Those little highs are the blips that poke up from a long, low valley of tension and stress. Resources are never quite so scarce that the game becomes impossible or even overly difficult, but it skirts that edge often enough to create an ever-present sense of dread. When you walk into a room and find 6 bullets, but then a guy spawns and you spend 4 killing him, you will be doing the math in your head. You'll be kicking yourself when you miss several shots during one encounter and desperately hoping you've got enough ammo left for the next one. I'm not normally into games that I deem really stressful. I want to have fun when I play games, and while I can enjoy a good challenge, too much stress can make me lose interest, especially when it involves trying something over and over again. That's why I tend to shy away from survival horror in favor of just horror. But something about Resident Evil 7 just clicks with me and gets the whole thing so perfectly perfect. All that tension, all that dread. I loved every minute of it. It was just so exhilarating. It made me feel alive, gloriously alive. I'm sure a lot of survival horror games are designed to elicit these feelings, and maybe I can chalk a lot of this up to my relative inexperience with the genre, but the constant intensity really captivated me. And of course, it's not just adrenaline-pumping fun in an action-y survival sense. This game is scary. It doesn't matter if you've killed a certain type of enemy dozens of times. The game uses all of these tension-building tools to potentially make even the simplest encounters harrowing experiences, and in some clever and unexpected ways. Sure, not having a lot of ammo is scary, but you know what's even scarier? When you enter a new area and suddenly the game starts giving you too much ammo. The environment will usually clue you into when there are goop guys around, and not only does this ensure that you'll be creeping through it like a scared kid, but it means that even the inevitable jump scares aren't cheap. When something pops up and scares you, you're not just scared because you heard a loud noise and something jumped at the screen, but because, oh crud, there is now a thing 4 feet away trying to kill me and I don't have my bearings yet. The game gives you plenty of opportunities to tackle situations with tact and careful planning, but it also uses this sense of security against you by removing that control, sometimes suddenly with an unexpected enemy spawn, or other times by forcing you to enter an area by means of a one-way, knowing that you can't just run back if things go south. I never, ever turned a new corner or opened a new door in confidence. I approached every new place with my heart pumping and my stomach tied in knots. That's just how effectively it builds atmosphere. The overall conservative nature of the game also adds an extra level of scary whenever your expectations are suddenly subverted. Most of Resident Evil 7 is spent strategically battling smaller enemies in close spaces, but it's got its fair share of crazy shootouts, especially the further you progress. These were crafted in such a way that they never devolve the game into a brainless shooter. You've still got to have good aim and a sharp eye for nearby items, but they change up the pacing and keep things fresh and exciting. That pacing holds strong for the majority of the game, too. Sequences rarely overstay their welcome, and each new environment or goal seems to come at exactly the right time, keeping interest at its peak. Even if an enormous amount of the playtime is spent navigating one farmhouse, you never feel bored or stifled. The overall design is so good that none of it seems like padding. One fantastic way the game breaks up the pacing is through the use of VHS tapes that you find at different parts of the game. When played in a VCR, each of these allows you to play out a sequence from the perspective of another character. They're all a ton of fun, and they serve multiple purposes. First, of course, they act to develop both the plot and the other characters. They also offer glimpses into areas you've yet to explore, which can clue you in on certain details and even raise the tension when you do reach those areas. Resident Evil 7 takes place on one relatively small piece of property, so these extra scenarios are another way the game keeps things interesting, making a lot out of a little. If I have one complaint about these tapes, it's that I wish there were more of them. There are only a small handful, and I was constantly hoping I would find the next one soon. And while we're talking about tapes, the first one you watch comes very early, and it gave me the impression that the designers drew some inspiration from indie horror games. The first hour or so made me feel like I was playing some Western horror game I found on Steam, and of course the whole tape thing in particular reminded me of Slender the Arrival. I think a lot of it has to do with the switch to first person, and actually there's something to talk about right there. When Resident Evil 7 was revealed, I was hit with equal parts intrigue and disappointment. I was sure that this quote-unquote new Resident Evil would be great in its own way, but 4 is one of my favorite games of all time. 5 was a step in the wrong direction, but I still hugely enjoyed the gameplay. I had been hoping that they would simply reel things in and bring the series closer to 4 again, which I feel had the perfect balance of action-y fun and scariness along with a lot of character and campy humor. I was afraid that moving things to first person would change the game into something I didn't like as much, and that maybe it would take itself too seriously like all of the most recent games. As far as the first person thing goes, it really didn't take long to get used to the change. Overall, I tend to prefer third person shooters, but when I saw that the slower paced combat I've always enjoyed was perfectly intact, the experience felt largely the same. And in this particular case, the perspective made things so much more immersive, and I was really able to put myself into the game. While I do want to see more third-person stuff in Resident Evil's future, I ended up being extremely thankful for the change. Then on the campy humor side, while it would take something of a miracle to match 4 with its stupidly suave protagonist and its cartoonishly fiendish villains and its preposterous scenarios, that charm is indeed present to a good degree in 7. Ethan, while largely a blank slate in the character department, presumably to allow for easier immersion, gives his fair share of stupid one-liners. Then of course the Bakers themselves can be psychotically goofy, and a lot of the situations you get into are just silly fun. Once again, the developers have achieved a great balance here. There was just enough of that zany stuff for me to feel like I was playing a good old-fashioned Resident Evil game, but not so much that it reduced the scary factor. As far as flaws go, I don't have a ton to report. Though it doesn't always feel like too much of a problem, there is definitely a lack of enemy variety. There are only a handful of goopy guy types and then the relatively infrequent boss encounters. I guess there are these bug things too, but they're pretty annoying to fight. Just not a lot of different stuff to shoot at. Like I said, the beginning of the game can be a bit frustrating when you're constantly avoiding a guy you can't fight and you don't know how to effectively get away from him. Even once I'd gotten a handle on the game, I would often find myself in difficult situations where I still wanted to run back to a save room every time I got a good item or progressed at all, which could waste time. I did enjoy the simple process of hunting around for keys and other progression items, but I really could have gone for more actual puzzles. And while the pacing is usually solid, the ending sequence did drag on just a smidge too long, mostly because you expect to launch into the final encounter around every corner, and things just keep on going for kind of a long time. The game's surprise factor is a bit of a plus and a minus. On the one hand, that first playthrough is positively packed with scary surprises, and it's a blast to figure out how to get through it. But on the other, there's considerably less replayability than previous games once you get it all down. Normal mode offered me a great challenge, but now I suspect that another playthrough will be way easier, thus kinda killing the fun. There's a harder mode called Madhouse, where there are more enemies and they're tougher and they spawn in new places and all the items are remixed, effectively offering a new and much more challenging experience, and I was all geared up to give it a go and really test my mettle, until I saw that the mode gives you a limited number of saves, like with the early games. This entirely kills it for me, as I have no interest at all in constantly losing hours of progress because I don't want to use too many of my save tapes or whatever. So basically that means that there just plain isn't a harder difficulty for me, meaning that replayability of this fantastic game just went out the window. Playing 4 and 5 on every setting and getting every weapon and collectible was a ton of fun, but that's just gone now, and it's a really huge bummer, especially considering just how amazing the remixing idea is. That's about it on the negative side, though actually, now that I think about it, this game does have one gigantic, unforgivable flaw.
Resident Evil 0, Resident Evil 4, Resident Evil 6. Hello, darkness, my old friend.
Seriously though, forks, even its flaws can't change how much of a blast I had with my initial playthrough. Resident Evil 7 offered me some of the most challenging, blood-pumping fun I've had in ages. It's a masterclass in tension building and in level design, specifically making the most out of small environments. There was a time early in the game when I thought, you know, this just ain't doing it for me, and I expected to give the game a 4, or maybe even a 3. But sitting here gushing about how incredible it was, I'm realizing that this might just be one of those special games I'll remember and think about forever. By the end, I was truly in love with it, and while the replayability thing was nearly enough to bump it down a point because seriously, I'm just never going to play such a hard game with limited saves, and rarely have I ever wanted a harder difficulty setting for a game this badly. But really, I can't deny how phenomenal the whole package is at its core. Resident Evil 7 gets a 7 out of 7. Thing about Resident Evil though, they made the games more about action because that sold more, and this one hasn't been selling too hot at all comparatively. So if you care about survival horror at all, do yourself and the series and even me a favor and go buy this game right now. Like, now. Like, go get in your car and go to the store and buy this game today. I would wait here and make sure you did it, but I'm scheduled to go and have all the knots in my stomach untangled and I gotta get going.